Okay, good day. I think we'll get started. If you have a cell phone, please remember to turn that off so that it's not a distraction. I need it, just for some information here. So today we're fortunate to have Emily Smith-Lundberg. She will be talking on deaf culture. Emily was the former governor-appointed board member of the Minnesota Commission of Deaf, Deafblind, and Hard of Hearing Minnesotans. She's also one of several deaf mentors for the Minnesota Life Track Deaf and Hard of Hearing Family Services. So please join me in welcoming Emily.
Thank you. Okay, I have to get a drink of water first. Deaf people get dry mouth too. Your hands don't get tired, but your mouth gets dry. I don't know why. Maybe we're nervous. I don't know. Okay, thank you. I'm so excited to be here today and share with you about deaf culture. As a deaf person, I live, breathe, and sleep deaf culture. How many of you have never met with a person who's deaf or hard of hearing before? Never, like never. Come on, be honest. Right? Good, 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 good. Well, I'm excited to share with you about my culture. Three important points that I want to touch on today is what is deaf culture, and some examples of deaf culture, and then what I wish hearing people knew about our culture and ASL and the deaf community. The world over, there are 466 million deaf and hard of hearing people. That seems like a lot, right? But really it's not. If you count all the hearing people in the world, it's a very small percentage. But we love each other. So what is deaf culture? Deaf culture really is the heart and center of the deaf community. There's a deaf social linguist called Barbican Appel, and she developed a specific linguistic meaning for deaf culture. And it's a set of learned behaviors from a group of people who are deaf, and they have their own language and their values and their rules and the traditions. Let me give you some examples. Let me give you just a tiny bit of history. In 1880, there was a very large conference in Milan, Italy. It was mostly hearing people that went to this conference, hearing educators. And the purpose of this conference was to decide and to set up goals for how to teach deaf and hard of hearing kids. During this conference, there was a lot of controversy during the conference. And they were trying to decide the best way to teach deaf and hard of hearing children. They decided the best way to teach deaf and hard of hearing kids was to use oralism or speaking. And that time it was a terrible blow to the deaf community. They were afraid that the deaf community was going to be extinguished. And at that time, a few years after that, George Vitz was the president of the National Association of the Deaf. Each state has their own Association of the Deaf, and they get together for conferences every year. Okay, and this conference was in 1913. So at that time, that was just the start of the age of the movie and film, and so the deaf community really took advantage of that in order to preserve their language and to preserve what was happening at that time in history. There's a wonderful presentation he gave, and there's a very famous quote at the end. There he says, I don't want to fall off the stage, as long as we have deaf people on earth, we will have signs. And as long as we have our films, we can preserve our beautiful sign language in its original purity. It's our hope that we will love and guard our beautiful sign language as the noblest gift God has given to deaf people. And I watched this video. I always am very inspired because, wow, at that time people were afraid that ASL was going to be gone, and they did not believe ASL was equal to English. But it has happened periodically through history as well, not just at this time. Let me show you just a snap of that. Let's hope this works. George, do you know how to do that? It should link to YouTube. And if not, that's fine. We can get by without it, but okay, that's okay. It's a YouTube link, but if you type in George Vitz and preserving sign language, you will get just a short 11-minute video. And the last part is probably the 30 seconds is this quote that you can see him sign. It's very cool. Okay, let's do some examples of deaf culture. How many of you know deaf people? How do you get their attention? maybe. Okay, I've got some waving. Yep. Somebody said yell their name. Okay. Well, how about this one? Waving. If there's a deaf person in the room and you can wave at them, absolutely. How about light flashing? You can flash the lights 1 or 2 times. Don't do it a whole lot because, shoulder tapping. You can totally 1 or 2 times. If you do it more than that, it means there's an emergency or you want their attention right now. How about on the table? Tapping a table. Now look, don't pound hard because, right, the whole room will look at you. But you totally can do that. You can stomp your foot. Not like you're mad, but okay. So if you're, you don't want to look like you're throwing a tantrum. So, a couple times. This happens all this time. I love this cartoon. People are signing, however many people, and a hearing person comes and is afraid that they're going to cause an obstacle and they don't know how to get through the conversation. Let me explain. Deaf people are chatting, they make eye contact, and they must make eye contact. It's extremely important because if you're distracted and you break that eye contact, that connection is gone. So people think, oh gosh, I can't walk between them. But really the best thing to do is just go ahead and walk through. You don't have to say, excuse me. You don't have to say, just go on through. It's not rude. In hearing culture, it would be rude, yes. But in deaf culture, it is not rude. It's rude to distract us, right? So just go ahead and walk on through. The man who does this cartoon, his name is Matt. He is a deaf cartoonist. And his wife, Kay, is a hearing interpreter. And they have 3 hearing sons, and he does amazing comic strips about real life and deaf culture. It's very great. All right, how to communicate with deaf and hard of hearing people. Make eye contact, for sure, that's very important. Hearing people, for you, how do you know that you're expressing your emotions? How do you express your emotions? Your voice modulates, right? Your voice goes up and down. So when people are signing for deaf people, we use facial expression. And that's really part of our language. It's the structure and grammar in ASL. And hearing people in the community sometimes are like, oh, deaf people are really mad all the time. No, we're not mad. We're just using facial expression that's part of our language in signing. Lip reading. I hate this one. Can you read lips? Okay. The best lip readers in the world only get 30% of the English language. 30%. So that's every, 3rd, 5th word? There's no way you can communicate like that. So please don't rely on lip reading. Mouth movements. When you're speaking, if you exaggerate your mouth movements, is that something you normally do in a conversation? Not really. So, and it's the same when you're talking with deaf people. Please don't exaggerate your mouth movements because it makes it harder. And don't cover your mouth, right? Because we need to see your face. We need to see your facial expressions. When you're chatting with deaf people, another thing to keep in mind is really we depend on information when we communicate. And so we don't have a flat facial expression. So when I'm communicating something to you, I need to know that you're understanding me and we're on the same page. So I need a head nod. Okay? Lighting is very important. It's important to have good lighting so that we can see each other. If it's dark or dim, it's harder to see. If it's super bright, that's hard too. So you need a good middle ground. And when you're speaking with a deaf person, make sure that there's not a bright light in front of you or a window. Make sure everybody's comfortable. If I ask you to repeat what you've said, please do that. Don't ever say never mind or, oh, it's not important. I mean, if it was important enough the first time, it's important enough for the second time. I want to be part of the conversation. I want to be in the situation. I want to be involved. And if something happens and I don't understand, somebody says maybe, I like your hair. And I say, oh, I'm sorry, what is that? I like your haircut, right? Because it's just varied a little bit. So if you keep saying the same thing over and over, it's not as helpful to help figure it out. And then also, when you go to a store or something, it's fine. Write back and forth with your deaf client. And you can use basic gestures, but write it down. Technology's great. Text it on a phone. You can read it on the phone. I have an app. My friend is developing, a deaf friend of mine, who is, it's a specific app that you use with hearing people with large text. So it makes it easy to read. So that's kind of cool. Or, hey, how about learning ASL? CLC has a wonderful ASL classes here that you can take. Maybe just learn the ABCs. Just that is great. It's wonderful. If you fingerspell, I'll show you the sign. And then you're learning at the same time. You're learning vocabulary. Okay. Again, deaf people are very visual people, and so we really want to know a sense of our environment. We want to know what's up and what's happening around us. So if people leave a conversation or a group, you always let somebody know, hey, I'm going to run to the bathroom. Hey, I'm going to go pick up the kids and then come back. We share information. For example, growing up, and still today, when I go to bed, I wake up, I checked everything around me when I wake up to see if I've missed anything, if anything's happened at night when I was asleep. Like the Christmas, it's Christmas now, and so the Christmas tree is up, and we have a cat, and so guess what happened this morning? So I always check those things the first thing when I wake up. There's also something called Deaf Standard Time. Okay, this is not for real. This is like not for work or school. It's more for social things. But what happens is that it's this picture. This is a restaurant. And they've closed, right? Obviously they've closed because all the chairs are up and all the deaf people are still there chatting away, and the people are trying to leave, and the workers are like, come on, get out. And deaf people are still there. I remember going out with friends and restaurants were closed. Then we go to Perkins because they're open 24 hours, right? And when Perkins was done, then we went to the parking lot. Chat. And then we got in our cars and chatted more. And then as we're leaving, we're still talking. Because this is something we really cherish, and that's our communication. And we live in the hearing world, where people are talking all the time and they have access to that kind of conversation. But, for example, when you go to a restaurant, you hear other people's conversations, right? Or maybe pumping gas. People are having a conversation. You can chat with people at the gas pump. Deaf people really make up for that when they get together. So they take advantage of that precious time to chat and to continue that bond that we have. And we have the same bond because we have the same culture, we have the same experiences, and we share information during those times. And we stay until everything closes. And ASL students who are taking classes here, when you go to an event, right, they learn that very quickly. Holy cow, it went for a long time, right?
Okay, so people are, in general, are late. So with deaf individuals, they typically will explain why they are late. It's not just because, oh, my appointment went long. They go into full detail and explain that the nurse messed this up and so on and so forth. So then they explain all of those minute details because they want to provide that communication and provide that information and the reason why they were late. So when somebody shows up late, it's a distraction, so everybody looks, therefore they explain that. So hearing people typically just show up and that's it. Or they don't go into detail, or they just the surface information. Okay, so for setting up the environment, we are very visual. So of course the lighting we talked about a little bit. But at a restaurant, typically we will pick a restaurant that is good with deaf people. For example, a restaurant that is willing to change the tables and the chairs so then we can move them around, and also has to have good lighting. Sometimes when you go to a restaurant, you know, they have that darker lighting, that mood lighting kind of thing. So we ask them, hey, can you turn it up, please? And kind of go back and forth because then they'll turn it back down. But we also look for a restaurant that has good waiters and waitresses. So then we have easy communication access and having a good customer service experience too. So at different events, let's see, I'm going to just step back and explain my wedding, what happened. So most weddings, typically you have rows of seating with the aisle in the center. And the bride and the groom typically are standing facing against the audience and toward each other. So my wedding was the complete opposite. There was no aisle and whatnot. It was just, we had all the seats lined up, and we had a stage that was facing the audience. Therefore, everybody could see us when we were signing back and forth, and they could see that connection and have that connection. And the pastor was deaf as well. And so we had 2 interpreters, and one was a male interpreter for my husband, who was voicing for them. And then we had a female interpreter voicing for me. And so they could see both of the individuals both of us at the same time, and it was a very fluid interaction that everybody could see and be a part of. We wanted both the hearing and the deaf people to be involved. So, for example, we also had a live band, and we wanted to be able to see that music and that. But my uncle, he built a wood floor for a dance floor, and my dad had helped him, of course, and they put the subwoofers and whatnot in the flooring, so then we could feel the vibration and feel that music. You know, there's just a whole list of things that we made and tweaked and changed. And, you know, we had the lights and everything because we had to make it visual. And now for in the home. It's an open floor plan, and that's very popular with deaf individuals. So, for example, my husband actually built our house, and the living room and kitchen and dining area is all one big open room. So then, you know, you can catch our kids doing mischievous things. We can catch it when they're out and about. But anyways, it's an open floor plan, so then it's very visual. And then we have many windows as well, because that provides natural lighting. And if you have lighting in the house, you have shadows, and so we'd replace the lighting to reduce the shadows in the house to make it more visual. Okay, I would like everybody just to kind of take a look at these pictures. So we have deaf artists, and these are individuals that are really, through their art, they're expressing their experience growing up as a deaf individual. So some people have a great experience, and others have a lot of trauma in there while growing up. So this one on the left is the family dog, and this artist's name is Susan Dupeau. So she had a hearing family, and she was deaf, and she felt like the family dog. You know, everybody was, oh, how are you? And then that's it. That was it. Just, oh, how are you doing? And then that was it. So that was kind of a picture of her experience growing up. And a lot of deaf people feel that way. And I would say 90% of deaf people are from hearing families. And only 3% of those 90% sign with their kids. So, that's a lot of trauma that those kids are experiencing. Now we have the deaf man by the name of Chuck Bard. He painted a mural called The Buff and Blue. And I'll be touching on Gallaudet University a little bit later, but this is at Gallaudet University. And these are all deaf individuals that are connected. You can see the yellow child, for example, is signing the sign for deaf. Yep, they have that sign for deaf. And then orange, that person signing were the same. Like, I'm deaf just like you. So they have that connection right there. And this one is, like, I finally found my place. Like, I found home. These are my people, my culture, my language, my everything is incorporated, and that is demonstrated in this piece right here. So a case study is painted by Nancy Rourke, and it's only used primary colors, which is her tendency when she's doing art, just kind of another little tidbit to add. But she's expressing the hearing world related to the medical field. And they really only focus on the auditory aspects and not the whole person in general. So we have the DNA strands, and it's being cut to remove that deaf gene from that hereditary gene. So then we also have the hands are tied up, it looks like, and looks like there's injuries and whatnot because they were banning signing at that time. Schools in the past had banned sign language, and if you were caught signing, they would hit you over the hands with that. So that's just 3 different artists, and there are a plethora of different artists, and I was struggling on which ones I wanted to pick, but these are the 3 that I then decided to show. Okay, stories. So we have, in deaf culture, there's many different stories, of course. And it's a good quote there on the left. So we really believe and cherish that passing down from generation to generation and that storytelling. So there's different types of stories that we can tell. So we have deaf folklore and deaf humor. So one story that I'm going to explain is the deaf King Kong. So do you guys know who King Kong is? You guys know the story. He meets the woman, he falls in love with them, gets married, so on and so forth. So the deaf King Kong, he goes walking in and he's climbing up the tower, and when he gets on top, he sees the beautiful woman, and the beautiful woman walks onto his hand, and he's just so in love with her, and when he asks her to marry her, what happens? Some get it, some don't get it. So the sign for marriage is this. So imagine big old King Kong, he's huge, and then you have a little tiny person standing on his hand. And, yep, missed out on that one. So we have deaf poetry. There's a lot of different connections with experiences growing up, cultural, emotional experiences that are withheld in those poetry. Now we have ASL songs and ASL rhyming. So deaf people naturally rhyme. Music in general, we can feel it, but not always knowing that full meaning. So we have 4 different senses. You guys have 5, we have 4. And so those 4 are heightened because we are missing our 5th one. So we have smell, sight, taste. Maybe we can taste better than you guys, I don't know, and then feel, of course. So our sense of feel is stronger, and we get that when we're listening, or we can feel the music, but it's different than what you guys get when you're listening to music. So growing up, I was not that savvy with music and whatnot. My parents, of course, they loved music, and they loved Janis Joplin. That was always going really loud. That was their favorite. And later on, many years later, I'm going to back up just a little bit. So for school, concerts and things, having an interpreter, that signing the songs, typically is very one monotone, and the interpreter was monotone, and I didn't get it. I didn't have that full access. But many years later, came to classes here at CLC, and the teacher here was very involved in doing the performance interpreting and signing to provide that equal experience for deaf individuals when they're at a concert with music. So at first I thought, oh no, that's way too much, tone it down, too much. But through that process, I learned the difference of like vibrato, for example, and how the musicians themselves and everything is included in what the interpreter needs to be doing. So growing up, I missed that. So now I really enjoy music because I've been exposed to and learned that whole process. So deaf people do have ASL concerts, but I don't think that there's maybe the fully equivalent access, but that concept is there, and it's being developed, and it's starting to spread. So ASL Hand Shapes, there's like ABC stories, for example, and that whole A to Z, and they use each hand shape from A to Z to tell that story. So for example, I will do a number story. So we have 1, 2, 3, not 3, it's 3, the thumb, the pointer, and then the middle finger, 4, and then 5. So I will incorporate those numbers to then tell a story related to my presentation today. So we have the number 1.
A girl walked in, looked around, felt very brave, and got up and spoke. Okay, watch again.
1,
Girl walked in,
2,
looked around,
3,
felt very brave,
4,
spoke,
5.
and got a standing ovation.
So that is a number story, which is similar to an ABC story. And then we have narrative or personal experiences stories that really they tell their experience of their story growing up. And then movies or cinematography stories, that's, you never forget about those movies. Because typically that story is, so for example, Star Wars. They will say, like, the princess will say, "I love you," and then Han Solo will say, "I know." So we're just going to take that scene, for example. So deaf people, when they're doing that, they will copy that scene when they are then acting that out and providing that full language access to that clip or that movie.
Okay, so I have some deaf jokes as well. There are hearing jokes that deaf people do not get because they're based audiologically. They're based on sound. And for deaf jokes, they're much more visual, and maybe it's our experiences as well that make them funny. Okay, so this is the motel joke. 2 deaf people went on vacation, decided to stay at the motel for the night. Gosh, we need some snacks. So one decided to go buy some snacks. The other stayed at the hotel. But he came back and realized, oh my gosh, it's dark. I don't know which room is mine. I can't remember. So he sat in the car, laid on the horn until all the lights came on, until one room was left dark. Oh, that's my room. All right, so a family joke. Here's another one. A man was losing his hearing. He went to the audiologist, got hearing aids, went home with his family. A month later, went back to do a hearing aid check to make sure everything was fine. The audiologist said, gosh, your hearing is back to normal with your hearing aids. That's great. That's amazing. The Hard of Hearing man said, yeah, I'm not telling my family about it, though, because I've been listening to everything that's going on, and I've changed my will 3 times. All right, here's another one. Can you read? Hearing man was looking at a deaf man on the street, and he wrote a note. And the note said, can you read? Passed it to the deaf person. The deaf person wrote down, no, can you write? Okay, this one's a fart joke. Hearing people think farts are funny, right? I mean, I know my family, they think it's hilarious. I don't know. But deaf people don't think it's funny. Because, again, it's sound-based, right? So the joke is, why do farts have to smell? Because God wanted to provide the same experience for deaf people as hearing people. Okay, last one. Lights off. Two deaf friends went out, chatted all night. You know, we talked about deaf standard time, right? Chatted and chatted. Came home very late, chatting with each other again. And then one of the men said, "Ooh, your wife was mad last night because you came home late?" The other deaf guy said, "Nah, oh, well, she was swearing all night." He said, "What did you do?" "I turned the lights off." Conversation's done when the lights go off. Okay, so those are just a few examples of deaf jokes. Name signs. You guys know what a name sign is? This is a big part of deaf culture. My name sign is this, an E shaken. So E, for Emily. And really, maybe I should back up. Really, I should this is my name sign, Emily. Because when I was little, I liked running in circles. I don't know why, but I just did it. So then my name sign became Emily running in circles. I don't know. So, and now it's kind of changed to Emily, just shaken. Anyway, so, you know, native tribes used to give name signs to people. And deaf culture does the same. And a name sign can only be given by a culturally deaf person. A deaf person who knows the linguistics of American Sign Language and knows the rules, they are able to give a name sign. For example, I have a friend, and I think she's 5 now, and so we had a friend was named Kari, and my 5-year-old friend signed woman for Kari, always. And I thought, what is the world? So that became her name sign, is a K in the same shape as the sign for woman. So you need to have the right place and the right time. You just don't give name signs. They're very precious, and you have to assign them appropriately. And this is Gallaudet. I'll explain him just in a minute, but this is his name sign. It's a G, Gallaudet, on the head. For his glasses, I believe, Gallaudet. Okay, this is Gallaudet University. Who's going to Gallaudet University in March? Ah, good. One of the most special places in the world for deaf and hard of hearing people is Gallaudet University. I cannot explain to you how important this is. The first time I went onto campus, it was like, there are no words, really. Let me explain. Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet was a man who wanted to start a school for the deaf. He wanted to work with deaf people. But here in America, there was no way he could learn how to do that. And he did hear about some folks overseas, Laurent Clerc in France, who was teaching deaf and hard of hearing kids. So he got on a boat, got to France, and months of begging it took for him to convince Laurent Clerc to come back to set up the American School for the Deaf in Hartford, Connecticut. And that was set up, really it was the start of the University for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. Abraham Lincoln signed the charter for Gallaudet University in 1864. So it's been around a long time. It is the only liberal arts college for deaf and hard of hearing people in the world. So 50% of the teachers are deaf, 50% are hard of hearing. Hearing. And in order to work there or go there, you really must have the right attitude. I mean, there's got to be a good reason why you're teaching at Gallaudet. You have to be taking sign language classes. You have to be learning the 5 registers of ASL and the 5, You must have a certain level of expertise and pass the test at a level 4 in order to even be allowed to teach there. And if you cannot, then you can't continue to be employed at Gallaudet University. Growing up in a mainstream school, I grew up here, went to school in Brainerd. I had a wonderful experience in Brainerd, and my parents really made sure I had equal access. They had made sure I had a good education. It was a great experience. But then I went to Gallaudet, and my first class I walked in, I sat down, and the classrooms were set up in a deaf way, so they were set up in a half circle so everyone could see one another, and I was waiting for the teacher, and the first thing I noticed is that everyone was talking, and I understood all the conversations. I was understanding all the stuff. Growing up, I never had that. I missed out on all that conversation. And the teacher showed up and started signing, and I was like, wait a minute, I'm looking for the interpreter. And I realized, oh my gosh, I don't need an interpreter. I can get it right from the instructor. It was mind-boggling. I was part of the class. I didn't have to worry about an interpreter not understanding me. I didn't have to, any of that. I was just involved. It changed my world. People like Gallaudet who work there in the cafeteria, in the post office, wherever, they all sign. So it's a place that is really has equal access for the community. There's no thinking about communication. There's no thinking about access like I do here. It's totally open. And this is Chapel Hall. And this is the first building right on campus, and the first building built there. The clock tower is a very famous part of Gallaudet. Before Washington, D.C. Was built up the way it is now, that's where people would look to watch the time in the whole entire town, is they would look at that. Here's our campus. You'll see that's the Capitol, the U.S. Capitol. And over here is the Library of Congress. And then right next to there is the Supreme Court. And the federal building is there. It's a very special place. Okay, deaf people love details because we're always looking for information. And hearing people tend to say, oh, look at the person over there. That's the end of their sentence. And deaf people will say, well, look at the person over there. That's the boy. You know, the boy, he's Caucasian. He has glasses. He has a green sweater on, blue pants, sitting with his legs crossed. Who do you think that could be? Yeah, right. So they will describe on and on and on. And hearing people say, well, the boy. So deaf people love details, and they will give you them. They have really nice teeth, right? All of them? And deaf folks are very advanced in technology. We're always looking for ways to stay connected with information in the world and have access to communication. So we texted way before, in the 90s, before anybody else did. You guys all caught up later. We have video phones. We use FaceTime, Skype, and we started using that in the late 90s. Captioning. We've had captioning forever. Now hearing people like to turn the captions on for each other, right? Not just for deaf people, but they're good for everybody. Social media. Again, remember, deaf people really use video, okay? And it's great for social media. We can show each other. We have complete access to ASL, and so that social media is where we share videos and information. Okay, so you know how you've heard that hearing people are people are connected by 6 degrees? Okay, so deaf people are connected by 1 degree of separation. When you meet a deaf person, where you graduated from, I will know somebody there. I mean, that's very common. When I meet deaf people, I always ask 4 questions. What is your name? First and last name. Because maybe I've heard your name before. Maybe that deaf person knows me. Okay? Where are you from? Because the deaf community is all over. There's a deaf community in Chicago and New York and DC and Atlanta. I mean, there are deaf communities all over. And so you can make connections that way. Where did you go to school? Many deaf people went to deaf schools in the past. And so you would know I went to the Minnesota School for the Deaf. I went to wherever. Now more and more deaf people are mainstreamed, so that doesn't happen quite as often. But I say, well, I graduated from Brainerd High School. And people go, well, yeah, I know where that is. So you make that connection. And then also, where do you work? Because deaf community, maybe there's a lot of deaf people that work at the post office, at UPS, at in the federal government, or at schools, whatever. So when you can make that connection, then you can make that bond. We really value deaf children in deaf culture because that's our next generation. And they will carry on our language and they will carry on our values. So we hold them very dear. We want to make sure that deaf and hard of hearing kids have access to ASL and English, both. You need to have both. You need to learn English and ASL. And learning both of those languages is in the same part of the brain. Both support each other. There is no one is less than another. They are both equal. Okay, so a few things we wish hearing people knew about deaf people. We do not use the word hearing impaired. I mean, no, never, don't ever use it, never. Why? Because it means weakened or damaged. It's negative. Hearing impaired is a negative term. It means less than. It's inferior. And it does not mean that we are equal. And really, deaf people don't know the difference. They don't know what it's like to be hearing. I don't want to be hearing. Honestly, I like who I am. So please do not ever use the word hearing impaired. Use the word deaf or hard of hearing, but not hearing impaired. Many deaf and hard of hearing people have cochlear implants or hearing aids, but one thing that really they are sick of is that when the hearing people see that you have a cochlear implant or a hearing aid, oh, it means you're hearing now. And I'm just going to speak to you normally and make no eye contact and don't pay attention. It doesn't work that way. It's a tool and it helps, but that does not mean you are hearing. When you take that cochlear implant off or you take your hearing aids off, you're deaf. So make sure that you still communicate effectively with deaf and hard of hearing people. Many hearing people think that spoken English is a way to show intelligence in the deaf community. This is not true. Deaf people, there are deaf doctors and judges and pilots and bankers. They're not smarter than other deaf people. So spoken language really has nothing to do with a person's intelligence. Deaf people make jokes. We make jokes about our experiences. I remember I bought my first house. I was so excited, and my parents came to visit, and they came to help me set everything up and paint and do all that. And the first thing, I went into the house, and the water was running. I'm like, what the heck? I left the water on. I don't know how long the water was running. Then my second time, my parents came. The vacuum was still running. Jeez, seriously. So now when people come to visit our house, the fire alarm is beeping. I don't know what the deal is. We do change the batteries every 6 months, but that happens periodically. I don't know what the deal is. Growing up, I always slammed the cupboard doors. My parents were like, oh gosh, it's so loud. And so now, when we were building our house, I didn't want to ruin our cupboard doors, so I got the slow closing cupboards because then I wouldn't be slamming them. But now they don't exactly close all the way, so I don't know. I have friends growing up who are deaf, and they had the loudest music in their cars. I mean, you could feel it a mile away. One day, he was showing me something, the subwoofer in his trunk, and I was looking at it. And the car was right next to me, and I was standing outside. And he walked in and slammed the door, the trunk, on my fingers. And I was like, I couldn't scream because he was deaf. He couldn't hear me. So I'm like, ah! He started the car. And I'm like, wait, come, my hand's in the trunk. He's like, oh my gosh, what's now? Oh, holy cow, I slammed your hand in. It was black and blue and horrible. So that's one thing that could happen. That same friend. He has golden retrievers. And they have a long tail, of course. And so the sliding glass door. And he was like, why won't this door shut? Why won't this door shut? And the dog's tail was stuck in it. And he was like, oh, I'm so sorry. My 2 kids, all of their friends always want to come to our house because they can be as loud as they want. And you know what? I prefer them to be at my house, so I'm fine with that. 90% of deaf people have hearing children. So they're called CODAs, and it's KODA for kids who are 18 or under. And for adults, it's CODA, children of deaf adults. And my 2 kids are here today. And their first language is ASL, because that was their focus when they were born, is we use sign language. They really are part of deaf culture. They have that inside of them. They're part of the deaf community. And when I ask them, what's one thing you would like hearing people to know? They say they wish people knew that hearing parents and deaf parents were equal. I don't know, maybe deaf parents even give them more love. But the point is they're equal. Sometimes people think that, well, you're deaf, you can't have kids. And that's not the truth. When we go to public places, stores, or we go to check out, another thing they would like people to know is that when you're talking to me and I say, oh, I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Then they look at the kids to interpret for them. Please don't do that. Look at me as the deaf person. We can work it out just fine, but they're kids first. They're not interpreters. That's not their job. That's not their responsibility. Look at me. They think that's important. And hearing people, I think, want to start conversations with deaf people, absolutely, but they're afraid. Because they're afraid of looking dumb, right? Or doing something wrong. Or being silly. Oh, please, just try. I don't care if you do something dumb. It's really easier than you think. It's important to try. Let go of worrying about, oh, am I going to look silly? Don't worry about it. Just communicate. I'm a happy deaf person. I'm a confident deaf person. I'm a proud deaf person. And I get that from my parents. Because my parents fully accepted me as a person first. And when they found out I was deaf, they went to speak with deaf adults, and they wanted to know what a deaf adult looked like. They asked questions. They learned ASL so that they can communicate. And they showed me that I could be successful. So I really thank my parents specifically for that. Okay, I think we're done with the presentation. Do you guys have any questions? Remember, deaf people don't clap, right? So what do? You guys know this? Yeah. I'm open for questions if anybody has any questions. I would love to answer. No questions? Yeah. Yes, I graduated from Gallaudet University, and I'm a proud alumni. More questions? My kid's name sign, Stella, her name sign is like a star, like this, star. And then Bowden's name sign is short, it's a B and an O. Bowden. Yep. Oh, they're right over here. Can you guys stand up? Stella is 13 and Bowden is 8. Oh yeah, I grew up with dogs always, and so specifically standard poodles. They're very smart. I love them. They're my favorite. Anyway, so I would depend on my dog to know what was happening in the environment. If somebody was outside or a car was coming, I would watch the dog, and the dog would tell me. And so I always taught him to sit, stay, come. And if you said those commands, even if you had a treat, okay, I would do the same with sign. And so I would tell them to sit, show them the sign, put their butt down, give them a treat. And I had no brothers and sisters. I'm an only child. So my parents, if they wanted my attention, they would tell the dog, go get Emily. And the dog would run to me and run back and forth until I would come. So, kind of cool. Any more? Well, hi is a good one. Hi. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Please. For your welcome. Really, all you have to do is a thumbs up or a A-OK sign. What else? They're pretty easy. And there are a lot of YouTube videos online you can check out, but those are pretty easy. Before, when my parents were learning sign, there was no YouTube. So you had to learn from a book, and you had to go to take a class. And so luckily, it's much easier now. Oh, I'm sure I'll be seeing that. Because I'm liking all kinds of music now. You know that ASL is very different from other countries. You guys know that, right? So Africa has a different sign language. Europe has different sign languages. And ASL is very different too. So a lot of ASL is borrowed from French Sign Language because of Learnt Clerc was from France. But yes. No more? Sure, yeah, okay. When my kids were babies, I just ignored them and let them cry. No, I'd never do that. We had a sound monitor, and so when the baby cried, that was connected to a light, and the light flashed. And so if the baby cried really hard, the light flashed faster. If the baby was just kind of whimpering, the light was slowly on and off. So it was a nice indicator. We also have strobe lights on, like fire alarms or the doorbell. And I have a service dog too. He's trained specifically to alert to sound. Yeah, it depends on the situation. If you know, that if it's an emergency, it's great. But if it's like for a normal alert, sometimes those are irritating, yeah. And really, deaf people don't want to stand out. They just want to be the same as everybody else. So if there's a light going on and on and on and on and it never stops, deaf people are like, geez, right? So.
Emily, tell the story of when the first day that you got braces.
Sure. Well, my first service dog, she was a bigger dog. And I went to shower. And she got in the shower with me and sat down because she followed me around. She wanted to make sure to give me all the information. I was like, well, okay. You had a question. Okay, so I'm curious, when you're signing with him, are you kind of nervous? Or when you're trying to communicate with him, are you nervous or are you feeling okay about that? Because I know a lot of times, like, people get nervous and it kind of loses the connection. It influences the experience. If you are like, well, whatever. And, if you really just try, that's enough. It really is. Because it means something to that person. Yeah. And maybe you have the right to say, yeah, write it down so you can understand it. But that's good. I mean, I think that's equal. You're giving them equal access. They're able to communicate with you. That's awesome. Just say, hey, write it down. Let's communicate. That's great. Yeah, there's like level 1 is like you can't even sign. You have no sign at all. And then the next level is you can sign, but it's more like a word here and there. And then the third level is, you can sign sentences, but still it's a bit of a struggle. The fourth level means you sign clearly and you sign fluently, with facial expression, with facial mouth expressions that show grammar. That's very important. So that's on the fourth level. And then the fifth level is like a native deaf person. And no English in there. Yeah. I don't know of any community ed that we have here in Brainerd. I think CLC is the only place that you can take it. And it really depends on the person teaching the class. You want to be careful. I mean, if you have a hearing person that really doesn't know sign language really well and just thinks it's really an inspiring thing, that's the wrong reason to do. Yeah. So make sure that the person really is involved in the deaf community. I know there's a chiropractor in town who teaches some baby sign language from a book, but is not involved with the deaf community and not involved with anything at all. That's kind of a money-making thing. So that's probably not the best person to take a sign language class from. They have to be teaching for the right reasons. Thank you, everyone.